Welcome to another episode of The Brave Front, a podcast with a single purpose, to talk about men's mental health. My name's Tim Bainan, and if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button. In the meantime though, here's what's coming up on the show.
I've lived with clinical depression since my mid-30s, I think. That's when I was first diagnosed as having had, with depression. But it's become more prevalent and more embedded in my life, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years. And certainly in the last 8 years, it's been dreadful. And I was on my way to psychiatric hospital for an assessment, which would have meant an admission. And we live on the Isle of Mull, so it means a long journey to get to the hospital. So at least 2.5 hours, including a ferry journey. And, I just didn't want to go back to hospital. I just thought it was a complete failure and there just seemed no point. And I just saw the ferry and decided when we boarded, I'd jump off, and I did. I'm not sharing it just to get people to feel sorry for me or to be sympathetic. It's because I really believe that it's possible to live a life, even though I'm living with this dreadful weight at times. The whole aspect of the journey was to really enjoy exploring and not to have an agenda and not to feel under pressure to achieve massive goals. I wasn't setting to break any records, so I was really just exploring the coast of Scotland at my leisure, which was a huge privilege. Essentially, I had Scotland to myself. I was in these incredible sea lochs like Loch Nevis and Loch Etive, Loch Horn, and I didn't see another human in the upper reaches of those lochs. And all I had was seals and otters and eagles and deer as companions. So it was incredibly, rich experience.
Our guest this time around, Nick Ray, who you just heard, has, he'd probably be the first to admit, become an unexpected social media sensation. Earlier this year, Nick completed a 3,000-mile solo sea kayaking trip around the coast of Scotland, sharing his journey on Twitter along the way. Throughout the adventure, he also shared the story of his personal mental health journey and his life with depression. His honesty and openness, coupled with the beauty of Scotland and the simplicity of his paddle around its coast, captured the imagination of thousands of people around the world. So, what started out as a personal challenge turned into a journey on which he was joined by a global audience of well-wishers and supporters. One of life's nice guys, I spoke to Nick from his home in the beautiful Isle of Mull, where he talked about his early and teenage years in Africa, how life brought him to Scotland, why the outdoors has been such a central part of his life, and how he has lived with his depression for over 30 years. So the interview you're about to hear discusses some of Nick's toughest times, including his suicide attempt. But in it, Nick also beautifully expresses the power of nature and of time outdoors to provide perspective and to offer someone sitting alone in a sea kayak in the middle of nowhere an almost overwhelming sense of privilege. I love talking to Nick, and although the closest I've ever got to a sea kayak is a pedalo off the coast of Mallorca, I can definitely relate to all that he says about the benefits of being outdoors. I've always found that a run or a walk in the fresh air, perhaps through a wood, with the sound of the birds overhead and running water somewhere in the distance, has the ability to wash away troubles and to provide me with an escape from the thoughts in my head or from whatever stresses may be happening at home or at work. And there are countless studies that prove this. A 2021 study by York University, for instance, found that 20 to 90 minutes in nature, sustained for 8 to 12 weeks, had the best chance of improving mood and reducing anxiety. And that doesn't mean you have to hike up a mountain either. It's as much about a walk in the park or just time in the garden. The same study actually also found that while time in nature by yourself is hugely beneficial, doing things in nature in groups can have an even more positive effect. So the next time your family moans about going out for a walk, you can pull the science trump card and explain to them that it's for your collective mental well-being. Depression, however, as you're about to so eloquently hear from Nick, can be an impossible demon to shake off. So if you can relate to much of what we chat about over the next 50 minutes, there are some links to sources of support in the show notes. In the meantime, though, sit back, relax, and join us for the story of a sea kayaking tour of Scotland. Nick, welcome to the Brave Front. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you're able to do so today. How are you? And tell me, how's the beautiful Isle of Mull today?
Thanks very much. It's really good of you to invite me. Thanks. Mull is looking sunny and bright today, but it's cold. It suddenly feels wintry today.
Yeah, it sort of seems to have taken a turn a bit, doesn't it? I think this weekend's going to be a bit chilly. So yeah, not looking forward to the arrival of deep winter as it's on its way for sure. Make us all jealous and tell us what you see outside of your window. I bet it's better than what's outside my window.
Well, I live on a small housing estate, so I've got houses around me. But having said that, I mean, I can look through the houses and see the Sound of Mull and the hills on the other side of the Sound on the mainland of Scotland. So yeah, it's not bad. It's lovely. Yeah,
excellent. Yeah. I imagine for someone who loves adventure and the outdoors as you do, I imagine Mull must be a pretty idyllic place to live and to spend your time.
It is, and it's interesting. When I paddled around Scotland over the last year, I saw so many beautiful spots, but I always came back to Mull as my forever home, so which is important for me because I've been a rolling stone a lot of my life. So to feel like I've got somewhere where I can put down my roots is really important. And yes, Isle of Mull is perfect for me. Lots of coastline and hills and mountains.
Fantastic.
Space. Yeah.
Lovely. And I want to talk about that your Rolling Stone journey and how you ended up in Mull and how you got to where you are today in more detail for sure. But tell me a little bit about what does an average day or an average week have in store for you? What does your life involve at the moment?
Well, it's focused on writing because I'm writing a book about my trip. So that's a major task, and I have to keep reminding myself to treat it as a major task. But I do creative things. I make jewelry actually from pieces of glass and driftwood and other items I might find on the beaches. But the main thing is writing. That's what I'm doing. That's what fills my day.
Is that something you enjoy? I do a bit of writing and it's certain I find for my mental health, writing is something I find very beneficial. So getting things down on paper, I find quite a sort of cathartic exercise in terms of getting things out of my head and down on paper. Is that something that you found as you've been writing?
I do enjoy it. I mean, since the end of my journey, I felt like I've been wading through treacle, but I think that's because I've been expecting a lot of myself to be writing the next, sort of big travel book. But funnily enough, in the last couple of weeks, I've seemed to have found my voice and it's flowing a lot better, and I'm enjoying it a lot more now as well. I'm enjoying telling the story. So yeah, I do enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to getting to the nub of the book, really, which is the reason I did the journey and exploring that. So that's going to be really useful for me.
Yeah, it is a funny exercise. Writing is a funny thing, isn't it? It does kind of sometimes it's a mental challenge in itself. You have to overcome the sort of the hurdles of building momentum with writing. I find in terms of sort of getting over that initial writer's block and the initial thoughts of how you're going to structure something, what it's going to entail. But then when you get over that, you kind of get into the flow of it.
Yeah,
it's quite a natural process, isn't it? I kind of quite like that sort of flow when you get going.
Yes, yeah. I mean, but with me, there's the element of self-confidence as well. So my critical self is very present, and so I struggled. For example, last week I was on I hit a real low because my sense of self-worth and confidence was really low, and so anything I wrote, I thought was absolute rubbish, and I saw as quite pretentious. If I offered any sort of insights or thoughts that I may want to share, I kind of viewed them as pretentious gobbledygook, really, and who'd want to listen to that? So yeah, it's an interesting process. When it's going well, it's enjoyable, but it can also be a challenge for me to cope with myself within that process. If that makes sense, yeah.
It completely does. I found exactly the same. I find actually that sometimes when you write, the more you sort of doubt just yourself in terms of what you're writing. And I actually found some of So some of the, one way that I dealt with that was to write and then not to read it back, just to park it and leave it, and then come back to it a number of days later or a period of time later. And so you don't become, because otherwise I find myself, I become my own harshest critic. And whereas I could have written 1,000 words and then draw a red pen through half of it. But if you leave it and park it and walk away from it and come back to it, sometimes you see it with fresh perspective. So I find that probably helped me during that writing process. Take a step back from it sometimes. But listen, tell me a little bit about your background for the benefit of our listeners. I'm really keen to sort of find out a bit about you in terms of your journey, and we'll come on to the kayaking, we'll come on to Scotland in a bit. But as I understand it from what I've read, you were born in Zimbabwe, in the heart of Africa.
Yeah, so I grew up in what was then Rhodesia, of course. But I lived there till I was 15. Very happy childhood in many respects. My father was a policeman, so we moved around a lot. And some of the places that we lived were right out in the wilds, literally. And so that's where I was introduced to wildness and wilderness. And so I was very, very lucky to grow up a feral sort of childhood, really. And then
was that something that your parents embraced? Did they encourage you to get out and about?
Yeah, most definitely. Yes, I was very, very lucky. And my dad was particularly fond of the wildness of Africa. And he just through sharing time with him and being out with the family, I learned a huge amount about being comfortable in wild space and being comfortable with discomfort. For example, the sitting for hours, waiting patiently to watch, wildlife, and being patient and being quiet and silent and being respectful, I suppose, of wild spaces. And yes, and then certainly when we came back to the UK when I was in my mid-teens, I gravitated straight towards the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme and all the outlets that would enable me to continue to enjoy the outdoors, and that's what I did, really, and found my way into Outward Bound as an Outward Bound instructor after leaving school. I didn't go to university. I just went straight into the outdoors and worked for Outward Bound for many years, and was very lucky to have an incredible time with them. And I went back to Africa with Outward Bound. I worked for Outward Bound in Africa for quite a few years. And then after Outward Bound, kind of drifted a bit, but I sort of always working with people. So I entered the mental health field. So I worked as a support worker for a charity in the north of England and then in the middle of England. And then moved up to Scotland and met my wife and moved up to Scotland and kind of attempted to work in the outdoors again, but it didn't really work out. But so I kind of drifted for about 10 years, really, and then started undertaking these kayaking journeys, which have led me to where I am now, really. So,
but it seems to me that the outdoors has been in your blood and running through your veins through your whole life, basically.
Yes, it's incredibly a natural environment for me, in every respect. It's a place where I feel very, very comfortable. So I'm very, very fortunate with that, really.
Can I ask what brought your family you and your family from Africa to the UK?
It was the civil war at the time in what was Rhodesia and between what became Zimbabwe. So it was the uncertainty, and my father being in the police force meant that he was on the front line and was in harm's way a lot of the time. So so we decided, they're from England originally, so we ended up back here, which was a complete culture shock for me as I
imagine.
Grew up in Africa, but
imagine as a teenager in Africa, suddenly being transported over to England.
And I think that's probably why I've drifted a bit, in my adult years. But having arrived in Scotland, I feel very much, it's funny, being in Scotland, I feel like I found my home. There's something about the Scottish culture and the Scottish landscape, Scottish way of life that is reminiscent of Africa. It's very much a can-do attitude, and people don't think twice about having to drive long distances or, go shopping, about 20 or 30 miles away, or travel 2 hours to get to the nearest supermarket, which is very similar to my life out in Africa.
It's the most dangerous wildlife though in Scotland as there is in
No, well, we don't get elephants, yeah, but we do get we do get lovely wildlife up here.
Mm-hmm.
Eagles and stags and red deer, of course. And when I'm kayaking, I've got whales and dolphins and things like that. So yeah, it can be quite exciting up here, but non-threatening, non-life-threatening wildlife, that's for certain. No snakes, scorpions, or anything like that.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, I've seen the video. I saw one of your videos recently of I can't remember where you were, but you had the dolphins around you. It just looked so idyllic.
That was an incredible moment. Yeah, that was off Ardnamurchan, the headland there. Yeah.
Amazing. You're very lucky. Listen, I know that a lot of what you've discussed quite openly on your blog and on social, and your throughout your journey, throughout your experiences, you've talked very openly about your mental health and the journey you've been on in regards to your mental health. Are you happy to talk a little bit about that in terms of your journey and how that sort of first started for you?
Yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah, I've lived with clinical depression since my mid-30s, I think. That's when I was first diagnosed as having had, with depression.
Mm-hmm.
But it's become more prevalent and more embedded in my life, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years, I think. And certainly in the last 8 years, it's been dreadful. Yeah, it's been hard work. Yeah.
So that's something, I'm sorry if you don't mind me asking how old you are today.
16.
Okay. So something you've been battling and living with for 30 years is, as you say, it's changed over that time. Back when you were first diagnosed, then in your 30s.
Yeah.
What was life like back then in terms of did you recognize in yourself that you had issues and that you things weren't right? Can you remember what that was like?
No, because I don't think I was as self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was a young man who lived to burn his candle at both ends. I was incredibly active, and when I think back to myself, then there's certain aspects that I think I was pretty okay at, but I'm pretty shamefaced. When I think about how I kind of I just ignored the important things in life, maybe in terms of being more mature with certain choices that I made and how I approached work and my relationships, etc. So, I think I wouldn't recognize having had depression. I think, that it came to a point when I think what happened was I was working for Outward Bound, and I was working very, very long hours and quite a high pressure job. And just one day I just couldn't function. I was just sort of crashed and burned, and the GP signed me off. But then I got eventually referred to the psychiatrist who identified a deep depression. And then that was the first time I kind of had time out in a psychiatric unit, although it wasn't on a ward. It was like a outreach home. And it was, I think, when I was about 38 or about then, I think I was when I was first admitted into psychiatric care on a ward because of suicidal ideation. And I went into hospital a few times around that period. And then there was a long gap. I met my second wife, Karen, and so if there was a long gap where my depression was at bay. But I think, I always struggled with a low sense of self, and it just got worse. And I think when I kind of lost a little bit of direction employment-wise, I really didn't know where to head and where to focus my energy in terms of a meaningful, gainful employment.
Mm-hmm.
I think I struggled a bit then with myself. Yeah,
it sounded like was that like a self? In a way, one fed the other in terms of being unable to your depression, and that sort of point in your life, both sort of made the situation worse. Is that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's difficult to say really. They didn't really go hand in hand because we had a really happy life. We've always had a happy life, Karen and I. It's, that's the odd thing about my depression. It's not it's not as if it's not circumstantial. I don't think it's not because I live with incredible financial worries, or we're incredibly fortunate. When I look at what so many people are facing at the moment, I am in a very, very fortunate position, given just had a whole year off to follow a dream, really, and not many people, very few people could ever think of doing that. So I'm incredibly fortunate, and yet I really struggle with being able to enjoy life, or feel that I have anything of worth to offer, or any kind of belief in myself. And the way I describe it, it's like it's a constant process. I don't like to use the word battle because there's awful connotations around battle, but it is a process where I'm constantly working to stay ahead of the depression. So I'm employing mindful techniques. I'm employing cognitive behavioral processes. So I'm not being lazy about it. I attempt to do all the things that people with depression are encouraged to do. Live a healthy lifestyle and connect with the outdoors. But despite that, there's these moments like last week where the only solution that seemed to keep coming, it was like going around in circles, and the only outcome that seemed viable was to take myself off and disappear. And when I say disappear, was to take my life. And it's dreadful because I know, then I go into this process again. There's this cognitively, I know that's it's not an option, and yet there's something within me. It's I can't, if it's a feeling or a thought or a belief, it's almost ingrained in me to think like that or feel like that. And I find
does it feel like you're not in control of your mind at that point, or your mind's side of your mind's in control of you?
It worries me that sometimes it can be incredibly persuasive. Mm-hmm. So even on my journey, there were 2 times on my journey when, despite all the fantastic, incredible experiences I was enjoying, that this awful feeling swamped me, and I really had to struggle. I really had to fight hard not to be lured into making a dreadful decision, and that's when I get exhausted. So that's when I say to I'm in touch with my psychiatric nurse. That's when I really get tired, because you
described it so well when you said that it feels like you're trying to stay one step ahead of it all the time. It's almost like having a demon chasing you that you're just trying to stay ahead of all the time.
Yeah, and it's difficult to describe because it's not there all the time. So and I think that's the insidious thing about depression, is that anybody would look at me at times and think, cracky, he's actually quite good fun to be with. He's not boring. He's not, I can function really well, and I'm coherent, and I can hide it away, I suppose. And that's and so and it does that with me sometimes. That that there are times when I think, oh, cracky, why was I even, when I share stuff on Twitter, I get, a week later, I feel quite embarrassed because that's not how I'm feeling or thinking a week later. And I
but I think as I looking through some of your Twitter, I think a lot of people can relate to what you're saying at that moment in time. So I think, in a way, you're reflecting what a lot of people who also suffer from depression or how they feel in those moments as well. Yeah. So I think they recognize themselves in what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah. And for me, this is why conversations like the one we're having right now are so helpful, because, although I will continue to live with it, to know that by sharing my experience may help others helps me live with what I live with, rather than just becoming a completely private morass. It's like, I'm not sharing it just to get people to feel sorry for me or to be sympathetic. It's because I really believe that it's possible to live a life even though I'm living with this dreadful weight at times. And I often look at people who have other challenges, who may have a physical challenge, or who have another illness like cancer, or and folks are living their lives and continue to live their lives with whatever challenge they're faced with, and that's inspiring for me, and that's what I've discovered is the best way forward for me, is to accept that I will probably end up living with this for the rest of my life, but within it I can I can have some pretty amazing experiences.
Of course. And I think the power of talking, I think it almost sounds cliched when you talk about mental health, in that it's good to talk, you should talk, it's okay to talk. Everyone says those words an awful lot, but I think when you do talk the talk as well as walk the walk, the proof is there for everyone to see that it does make a huge difference to people when you do start to talk. Not only for individuals like yourself, and I've been there as well in terms of issues of my mental health and the positive benefits of talking, but also I feel for the people you're talking to and who are listening, there's huge benefit to them as well. So not only does it help you as an individual, it helps others as well.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's what I discovered on this journey. It was actually hugely enlightening for me to know that complete strangers would seek me out just to have a conversation about mental health and about their mental health journey, and be interested in my mental health journey, and find inspiration within each other. That was hugely rewarding for me.
Tell me a little bit about how your depression has impacted your relationships and life at home. It sounds like you have a very supportive wife who's there for you.
Yeah, Karen. Yeah, she's very, very understanding. That's goes without. I can't describe in enough words. How she's been there. Rock solid beside me all the way through. All the way through, despite some of the challenges I've presented her. In terms of my suicide attempt and my threats of suicide, and my general low mood and the crotchetiness that goes with it, and the poor communication and all the negatives that go with me and my depression. But no, I think again, if we to look at it from the outside, there, it has brought us together closer. I think it means that we talk more to each other and listen more to each other as well. I think that's it's good to talk, and it's equally good to listen, and I think that's hugely important as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And having someone there, just having that rock, that constant there, is so vitally important, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned your suicide attempt there. I'd like to talk about that if you're happy to do so. Tell me a bit about that day, and just talk me through it.
Well, there were a couple of events that had occurred that kind of really triggered me, and my belief, it's just rock bottom, quite simply. And I'd seen psychiatric nurse, and I'd seen a GP, and I was on my way to psychiatric hospital for an assessment, which would have meant an admission. And we live on the Isle of Mull, so it means a long journey to get to the hospital. So at least 2.5 hours, including a ferry journey. And I just didn't want to go back to hospital. I just thought it was a complete failure, and there just seemed no point. And I just saw the ferry and decided when we boarded, I'd jump off, and I did. And luckily for me, I was spotted, not until the last minute, and I was in the sea for a good while and hypothermic when I was pulled out, and then was brought back around again, and then admitted, of course, to hospital psychiatric care for about 6 or 7 weeks, I think it was. It was a long time. And and since then I've been in hospital a couple of times again. So yeah, it's not all been plain sailing since then. But I think that one event, it's sharpened my focus with regard to the value of life and appreciating life. But it also frightens me as well, because having been there and attempted it, and knowing how easy it was and how unfrightened I felt, how I wasn't regretful or frightened at all during the time in the water. It frightens me that it still seems a peaceful option sometimes when I'm in my deepest lows. So I've got to be very careful. And I really, when I talk about keeping safe, it's keeping safe from that the alluringness of that sense of peace. So it's useful in the respect that now I'm far more aware of working much harder to remain well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's I can see, I can see how scary that must be when you think back at it in that way, especially if it's, that you talk about the alluring nature of that piece, and I can see how terrifying that must be to think in that way. Tell me a little bit about. I read again on your Twitter, and I think an article in the BBC as well about you meeting up with the ship's bosun who saved your life on part of your journey.
Yeah, this was absolutely incredible, and it wasn't planned at all. It was totally unexpected. All through my journey, early on in my journey, because I had planned to visit the Isle of Egg, which is an island off the west coast of Scotland, and not far away from where I live in terms of paddling. It's only a day's paddle away. But I never managed to get there because of the weather. And so right at the very end of my trip, I paddled round to the west coast and then across to Egg. And it was a synchronous moment, if that's the word. Yeah, Donald lives on Egg, and Donald is the bosun on the ship which saved my life. He launched the rescue boat off the ferry which he was on, and it wasn't the ferry I jumped from, it was another ferry, and that boat was the one that found me. And he described, this boat brought me in, alongside the ship, and they couldn't get me aboard because it was too high. And he described with tears, how he saw me in a crumpled heap in the bottom of this rescue boat, and it was just one of those hugely impactful moments. So there wasn't a dry eye in the house because there were quite a few people around at the time. And, these two big, well, I'm not very big, but big bushy bearded blokes, who pretty rough and ready in their own way, and, sort of hugging and kissing each other, sort of in gratitude and, swearing forever friendship, really. And yes, it was just an incredibly powerful moment. And again,
did he seek you out, or did you seek him out when you were on the island?
He sought me out because what happened is, it's a very small island, and they've got a very tight knit community. So somebody had shared on their Facebook group that I was paddling across, and he put two and two together, and then sought me out. And people knew, because it's a tight knit community. So when I arrived, they said, "Oh, Donald wants to meet you." And so by the time I arrived, and after I'd arrived, I knew the meeting was going to occur, and I knew the significance of it. But the moment we met each other, and just to hear from him, what he'd observed, and ever since then, he'd been impacted, because he'd seen me, and he thankfully I'd survived, and he'd obviously wondered what had happened to me, and he went on to tell me what had occurred for the crew, and how the captain had reacted. So it was really interesting as well from that point of view, and forever grateful, of course. Yeah.
Wow. And it's a day that as memorable for both of you for very different reasons. Do you think it'll mean that but you mentioned you be lifelong friends now, you're going to stay in touch and keep in contact?
Well, most definitely, yes. I'll be paddling out to Egg again and sort of meeting him. I'll take my wife Karen out to meet him as well. So
fantastic.
His partner. Yeah. We've got a beautiful spot.
I'm so pleased because it's nice for something positive to come out of that day. So that's something that's good news. I've got to talk about the challenge and the adventure, obviously, in terms of your sea kayaking around the coast of Scotland. It's well, actually, how big for someone who doesn't sea kayak and has never been in a sea kayak and never attempted anything even remotely like that, how big a challenge is that? I mean, what are we talking about? How many days paddling is it? How many miles? How big a challenge is it?
Well, in the end, I covered over 3,000 miles, and I paddled for a whole year. So I set off on my 59th birthday, and I finished on the day I turned 60. So really, it was my rite of passage into my 60s. But in terms of the challenge, I suppose the big challenge was camping and living wild through a Scottish winter. That was probably a big challenge. But for me, it was an adventure, certainly, but it was well within my ability to cope with it, and I loved it. And if I viewed every day as just a paddling day rather than the journey in its entirety, it was within reach of my capabilities. And the whole aspect of the journey was to really enjoy exploring and not to have an agenda and not to feel under pressure to achieve massive goals. I wasn't setting to break any records, so I was really just exploring the coast of Scotland at my leisure, which was a huge privilege, which I did do. And I just paddled around the mainland of Scotland. I did paddle around Skye as well, so and took a year to do it, and met so many incredible people, and and some incredible moments with the wild and natural encounters and camping wild, etc. Beautiful.
I mean, certainly does. Looking at, your photographs and your videos are incredible. It does look like an absolutely astonishing trip. I imagine though that camping, especially, and kayaking in December, January, February, perhaps isn't as appealing as spring and summer. Perhaps am I wrong, or is there beauty in different ways?
I actually didn't. I actually found I enjoyed winter more than I thought. The difficulty, of course, was getting dressed every morning. Getting out of my nice warm my bed clothes and putting on damp kayaking clothes. But the beauty of kayaking in the winter and camping in the winter, there wasn't another soul around, so I had essentially I had Scotland to myself. I was in these incredible sea lochs like Loch Nevis and Loch Etive, Loch Horn, and I didn't see another human in the upper reaches of those lochs, and and all I had was seals and otters and eagles and deer as companions. So it was incredibly rich experience from that point of view. And so it was, and really beautiful, because of course the mountains were sometimes covered in snow, or very, very stark landscape in the winter. But,
amazing. To undertake anything like that, though, any kind of challenge involving just yourself and being in remote places, it's time by yourself, isn't it? Ultimately, is that, and it's something that has to be something you have to be comfortable with, I'm assuming, as well. So being happy to be in that place by yourself,
the joy of solitude. Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any idea did you have any idea when you set off about how much of a social media following you were going to get along the way?
No, that was a complete no. It did genuinely take me by surprise. I mean, I remember getting to my first night camping, and I was still within range, of course, of Wi-Fi and stuff, and of the internet, and my phone was just pinging every second with new followers on. I had to switch all my alerts off because it was just going crazy, and and it just seemed to capture people's attention, and it really, Well, I suppose it enhanced the journey from that moment onwards. I found that I had people from all over the world showing a huge interest in what I was doing and where I was, and just enjoying my photographs. And it was it turned out that not I created, but a community grew up around me, which was really rewarding.
Did that feel a bit like having sort of companionship along the way, because those people were taking such a keen interest in everything you did? I just want to, why do you think that it happened in that way? There's lots of people who go on journeys and adventures who don't get followed in the way that you did, but as you say, it seemed to capture people's imagination.
Maybe because maybe I was not out to prove anything. I was just out to amble around Scotland and wore my heart on my sleeve, I suppose. I spoke about my experiences as they emerged. To be honest, when I set off, I actually said, I think I said to my wife, I'm just an old bloke going for a paddle for a year. And, why would anybody be interested? And I think that's probably why people were interested, because, not obviously because I have a huge amount of sea kayaking experience, and I've done it for years and years and years. So from that point of view, I was well able to handle myself. But to all other intents and purposes, I was fairly ordinary, and and I really attempted, and I continue to attempt to share my experience in a way I hope is engenders a sense of accessibility for adventure and outdoor connection for everybody. I do worry at times that adventurers like myself, people who have passions for sport, can actually be a little bit more, unwittingly quite exclusive. It's like, you can go sea kayaking, but you need to join a club, or you need to do all these courses first, or you need to attain these levels first before you even think about, kayaking in certain places. Whereas my approach is very different to that. I really believe that inherently people will look after themselves, and it's hugely beneficial for folks to have adventures in their lives. And I wouldn't say that everybody could paddle around Scotland on their own, because there are things to take into account, but there's certainly plenty of other similar endeavors that are within reach most people, I think.
I think it was perhaps the simplicity of the journey that appealed to people. I think a lot of, I see, and I've spoken to people on the podcast who also embrace the outdoors and show huge passion and enthusiasm for it, and talk about the mental health benefits of it. But they might be running, 100 miles, these sort of extreme adventures, and climbing mountains and taking on triathlons and these kind of things. And for a lot of people, that's out of reach, because it's, requires a whole different world to which most people inhabit. But I think the simplicity and the beauty of the pictures and the videos you shared, and that the simple nature of the activity, the slow nature of the activity, I think, which is also so sort of calming. I think a lot of people could relate to that, and sort of see themselves, or want to see themselves in your shoes. So I think a lot of people can relate to it in that way.
And I the number of messages or comments I received were along those lines. I just love the simplicity of it, and wish I could do something like that. Take myself out of my busy life. And yes, I think as I get older, I look for a more simple existence. I think we complicate life considerably sometimes. And about 10 years ago, my wife and I, we literally just got rid of all our belongings and bought a yacht and lived aboard a yacht for about 7 years, because we felt overwhelmed by the complexity of living in a house. It was very odd. Mm-hmm. And once we're on the boat, we lived within our means. We had what we needed that we could store on the boat. And if we needed anything, that we wanted to buy anything, then we knew that we had to, we had to justify it and find a place for it or make space for it, by getting rid of something. And and I think a lot of people do seek that, particularly nowadays when for a lot of people, there's anxiety around the climate and how we relate with each other socially, and there's a lot of anxiety out there. And I think what calms anxiety is a desire for simplicity and honesty, I suppose. And that's the other thing. I think, when one becomes simple, then we become more true, to ourselves, and therefore, in the way we relate with other people, it's a more honest and open dialogue, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think we can all relate to, almost feeling trapped by your belongings, in terms of the fact that, I live in my house. I'm married and I've got 2 children, and consequently, we've accumulated so much stuff. Everywhere is stuff. I'd give anything to just kind of do a deep cleanse and get rid of it all, and kind of just start with a blank sheet and go, right, okay, what actually do we need? We don't need all this stuff. What actually do we need? That's I think an exercise I think that we would all benefit from at some stage, for sure.
Yeah, and I think again, this is something where we may begin to give ourselves a hard time. It's not our fault really that we live like this nowadays, because it's out there, and we're propelled towards buying stuff because of the way things are sold, are portrayed to us, and we find that we may need we have to exist with it, because nowadays you need smartphones to pay your bills, or it's all shifting towards that lifestyle. But within that, I think it's it may be finding the opportunity to take time out and go away for a weekend, or go and glamp somewhere in a yurt and just live where there's only a standpipe, and collect your water from one pipe, and all those things really that you probably wouldn't want to live your life all the time like that, but it's those moments of simplifying the process of existing that allows you to gives you room, I think, to the space to see what is really important for you, and
grounds you. That's what I think. I think that too.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's in terms of my mental health, that's grounding is so important, and it's literally feeling the earth beneath my feet. Sometimes it's it's that important. It's when I'm so fortunate here in Tobermory to be able to walk down by a stream where there's waterfalls and rapids, and down to the seashore, and just stopping and just
being
just noticing just noticing how simple it can be just to connect at that level. It helps me to ground me, and then beyond that, then I can make choices. I feel like I'm not being browbeaten into.
Indeed, it's almost like pressing a reset button, isn't it? And then thinking, right, now I've done that, now I can breathe again. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Coming back to the paddle, coming back to your year, as you look back, and maybe as you've been writing the book, have you been struck by? Is there any particular day or any particular memory that is particularly strong for you? Anything that you look back on as a particular highlight of the year?
There aren't any specific moments. I mean, there's so many times that if I was the way that this is what happens. The way that it works for me is if there's a theme working within me, or I'm aware of, that there will be a highlight from the trip that will have meaning for that theme. So for tenacity, for example, being tenacious, I would think possibly of a really tough day on the north coast where with a really big swell, and just feeling very alive and very challenged by the day, but incredibly rewarded at the end of it as well. An incredibly atmospheric day with huge waves crashing against the cliffs, and really a sense of huge power of the ocean. and then there's those exquisite moments of coming up on a couple of sea eagles parked. They'd park themselves, or perch themselves rather, on a skerry, which is a pile of rocks in the sea, and they didn't fly away as I drifted up. So I was within meters of these huge birds, who were so impassive in allowing me to be present with them in that moment. And eventually they just unfolded their wings in these huge wingspans and flew off, and it was just a really special moment. Or just moments when another time when I paddling Loch Etive, and I woke up in the morning and it snowed, and I was just my tent was like an igloo, but I felt like I was the last human on the planet. It was just a really incredibly delicious experience, to be honest. It wasn't, there was no hardship despite being in sub-zero temperatures. It was just one of those really, really wonderful moments. And I had 2 days of just chilling out there in my tent in the snow before paddling off, and then coming down the east coast, paddling into a cave which was dark. I couldn't even see the end of it, and I got to a point where I couldn't see the tip of my boat. It was so dark. But deep within the cave, I could hear seals singing. They weren't singing; they were just calling to each other. But it sounded like singing, and it was incredibly spectral, but also tuneful and beautiful. And just one of those. Not many people will have had that experience, and so
incredible sense of privilege, I imagine, when you're in those moments.
Exactly, that's exactly what I felt, and now kind of wished I could have bottled it, and bottle it in a bottle and share it around. But those moments, and then lots of little childish, boyish moments. I think this journey was great for me in terms of reconnecting with that sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness, which was reignited the sense of play within me. And so, paddling under sea arches, or going in through caves, or paddling around a headland, wondering what was around the other side. And just delightful, really. Right. Yeah.
So tell me, that obviously that was an incredible adventure for you, lasted a year. What comes next? Is there anything else on the horizon?
Well, nothing huge, but I'm keen to have lots of little adventures. So I've been talking about funny enough, I've never kayaked all the way around the Isle of Mull in one go. I've done all the coastline, but on different days and different months and different years. So I'm thinking of maybe sometime in January paddling off and going around Mull.
Okay, in January. Okay.
In every nook and cranny, and just exploring Mull. It'll take me about 10 days to do the whole coastline, January, February. But
fantastic.
I have a sense that I'm going to be quite busy next year. I've got my book, of course, to write, and the interest has been fantastic in terms of my journey. So people invite me to speak, or and the other thing, as a result of my trip, is I've connected with people who want to paddle with me. So people want to kayak with me. So I think a lot of my time will be given to that as well, sharing time with people on the water, which would be fantastic.
Fantastic. And you also wrote as well about the fact that you said that the end of one adventure has sort of started the next, in terms of your sort of journey in terms of raising awareness of mental health and supporting others, and this being the start of a whole new journey for you in that space as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I want to increase that exposure for myself. I want to do more public speaking. I want to attend. I just want to share my experience. It's a funny thing, really, because that requires a level of pushiness, which I'm not very used to. I'm not somebody used to how can I say it, promoting myself in a way that gets myself noticed.
I don't know. I wouldn't say 112,000 followers on Twitter is that's quite an achievement. I don't think you've been pushy in any respects at all to get that huge following. Yeah. So I don't think that's something you need to worry about necessarily.
And I think my goal is to set up a charitable foundation as well, to provide the means for folks to have adventures in their lives, and this will be people in the later years of their adult life, really.
Fantastic.
Who and with a focus on people who may be facing mental health challenges in their life. So, but that I've got to write the book first, I think, before I can put my mind and effort into that. I think, otherwise I'm spreading myself too thin.
One step at a time, babe. One step at a time.
Learn from experience. That's what I need to do. Yeah,
indeed. Nick, thank you so much for being so open and being so honest and sharing so much of your journey and your adventures with us. I really appreciate you being so candid and being so open. It's been absolutely amazing, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Right, take care. Cheers, Nick.
That's it for another episode. If you've been inspired by Nick's story and would like to join the thousands of people who already follow him on social media, you will find all the links to do so in the show notes. And if you're living with depression and, like Nick, find it hard at times to keep it at bay, there are also links in the show notes to resources and organisations that can help you. You'll also find our episode question there too, which this time around is: how has time outdoors and adventure helped your mental health? Our yes/no poll, meanwhile, simply asks, have you ever attempted sea kayaking? I'd be fascinated to see how many of you have. You can answer both on the Spotify episode page, the link to which can be found in the episode notes, through the Linktree site in the show profile or the Bravefront website. You can also interact with the show by sending us a voice message. We're always really keen to hear what you think of our guests and the subjects we've been discussing. You can also tell us your ideas for topics and things you'd like us to cover. Again, just head to the episode notes, the Linktree site or the Bravefront website for more details and the links to do so. And finally, if you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a review and subscribe on whatever platform you usually get your podcasts. In the meantime though, look after yourselves and I'll see you soon. Take care.